My name is Carson Cooman. I am a composer and an organist specializing in contemporary music. And I'm here today with a composer friend of mine of many years, Frederick Frahm from New Mexico. I've known Fred about 20 years and have been very involved in his work in a variety of ways, have admired it for a long time. And today we're going to have a conversation that focuses especially on his organ music, which is a large part of his output. He's written in many genres, but there's quite a lot of organ music, and there's plenty to talk about related to that. So it's so good to chat with you, Fred.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be able to do this with you today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Probably it's best if we begin a little bit at the beginning. Can you give a little bit of your background regarding when the organ first came into your life and how it became an important part of what you do?
I was a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod kid when I was baptized, and I don't remember as much of that. What I remember more was, let's go up the street to the bigger church where it has a better music program and a more interesting set of things going on. And that really was formative. The musician there was the pastor's daughter, who actually was a seriously good player. She had a lot of repertoire. I don't remember her making any mistakes. It didn't catch my attention. The parish was a fairly high church, and so we sang a lot of the chorales, and I was in the choir when I was old enough, and the choir director at that parish was also my choir director in school. So I felt like there was a kind of a seamless connection between my parish community and my high school, and as I was growing up. And at some point, Christy this was the organist, was having her, I don't know, second or third child, and that 8 o'clock service was just not going to be possible. She just could not do that. And I happened to be practicing. I somehow got a key. I was up there playing, and the pastor magically appeared. I didn't even see him sparkling. It's like he just beamed up there. He was suddenly standing there, and he says, "So these are the hymns for Sunday, and I'm delighted that you'll be playing for us, and you'll get $140 a month." I was so excited. I was a high school kid, and that was the most money in the world. I played all of the hymns very quickly. I was reminded of that on the way out the door, but it was my first church job, and that was when I was about 16 or so. Now Trinity had a massive Allen from 1960 or so. Maybe it was 65, and it was 3 manuals, a couple of 32s and reeds and all the scary stuff, and I loved it, and it was actually a fairly good room. But I really never heard a pipe organ until I got to college, because what I knew was what was in that particular parish. And that congregation was long emphasized that, you play good stuff, find some Bach, find some Mendelssohn, do some real repertoire. The hymns are really important, more so perhaps than your repertoire. And so I learned how to prioritize my way through that. When I was ready to think about college, the pastor said, "You know what? There's a guy from PLU in town. You should go meet him because it's a good college. Just check it out." And so we went down, and he was a young kid trying to do recruitment all across the country, and he was exhausted. And I said, "Well, I was interested in the organ at the time. Are there any at PLU that I hadn't heard about?" And he says, "Well, yeah, they're pipe organs." And I had no idea what to think about that. And that there were 7 at the time. There was the Van Vulpen, the big Kilgan, the Cassavan in the hall. There was the Bosch upstairs in Tower Chapel. There was the Schlicker across the street, which is where we took our lessons. We had access to the Brumbaugh at Christ Church in Tacoma. I think you played that organ.
I have, yeah.
And then there was the little Brumbaugh continuo organ, which was really a wonder to play. And then there was this weird little Olympic pipe organ that was slammed in a practice room. All you could do was open the door and slide on the bench. You couldn't actually get around it. and all of them were strange. All of them were different. All of the stop lists were very, very disparate from the other. Very disparate. And it was a kind of a cool thing. So David's a great teacher. I worked with him and Gregory Peterson while I was there, and always that emphasis on choral preludes, on the Bach, the Orgelbuch line. I was in college when the Neumeisters came out. That was, the whole world shook with excitement.
Sure. Yeah, more Bach. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, lots of early Bach. And so, I kind of worked my way through that. But my parish life had good music to start. I don't know that I associated it with being about the organ, other than my experience of it was really well played, and it always just was part of the structure. So yeah, then that's been a while.
Yeah. Do you remember what the first organ piece you wrote was?
Yeah, it's that Schmucke Dich. Really, that was a complete.
Oh, Chorale Prelude.
Yeah, that's about. I wrote it for Susan's degree recital. So that's about 1986, I think.
Okay.
The pieces that I wrote before that were either choral or vocal. And I wrote that piece. There's a little prelude on Paderborn that's in the Episcopal hymnal. There's one of my early settings, Picardy, which is in that grouping. And I just didn't write a whole lot of organ music until I got to St. Paul, Bellingham, which is when I got contacted more in terms of working with Augsburg with Norma Ahmet Nelson. And she would write about saying, well, I need hymn introductions and preludes. How fast do you do them? And I said, well, I'm game, whatever.
Yeah.
But Norma, it is December 7th. So and I know that you have these 30 tunes you want me to do something about. When do you want it? She says, well, I got to have them before Christmas. So all of those hymn intros, and because ELW is starting to get resourced around there, they're getting ahead of that stuff, and then the Piano Plus books, all that stuff was hammered out in the middle of the night when I was living in Bellingham. The first really, probably the most important work is that first fantasy, which had a bunch of sketches and developments as it was working through. And that really was written with that big St. Paul organ in my head, the 64 ranks there, Skinner rebuild. And that's the first time I thought, okay, so I'm not going to worry so much about writing something for church. I need to make a piece that's for the organ.
More of a concert piece, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting with chorale preludes, you've continued writing them up to the present day, but I think one could say that certain aspects of how you treat the tune has changed a good bit from that early point relative to, say, the ones that you've written even earlier this year in 2021. Mostly in the sense that the earlier preludes are more in the Lutheran tradition, with the tune present and accompanied.
Yeah.
In a way, and the preludes now sort of break up the material, use fragments of it more, sometimes hide it in the texture, use a little bit of it to make a sort of different sort of piece out of it. Was there sort of a conscious shift in relation to the material over time, or just part of the general style evolution? That style, what does he call it? That tessellated style, where there are broken pieces or sections that are knit together. That's been in my writing for a long time. There's two big choral pieces. One's called the Ecce Sacerdos Magnus, and then there's a Missa Brevis that I wrote in about 1987 or so, that are in that style. We performed one and not the other, but at the same time, in the middle of that, there's a setting of the 23rd Psalm. It's all about melody and gooey chords and lots of lovely organ writing. And so I've been fighting that dichotomy for a long time. When it came around to, Fred, we should do an organ book, from Norma, many of those pieces were new to that book, but I dragged in a couple of the really old ones, and I left out the scary ones like Shing In, because I knew that wouldn't work for the crowd that they were thinking of. But that was the idea, is what crowd are you thinking of? Right.
So that first Faith Alive collection is a little, is me trying to resource the church with music that sounds like me. The second Faith Alive book is me doing that, but more music that sounds like them. Right. And you see that a lot of times. I've watched a bunch of composers write, like Charles Orr. He's got those 8 or so books of improv. The first few are stunning. I mean, that's how you take apart a hymn tune. and then they start becoming more generalized.
They're a little more traditional. Yeah.
Yeah. So with these chorales, especially the last few, and a couple of good examples. One is that Saint Anne that I did last fall.
A couple years ago. Yeah.
It's in there. I mean, the tune's in there, but it's also it's me working through what I would say is an affect, not so much as, you know, I got this motive that I'm going to use like in an organ boot line, but this general feeling as an affect. And I want the tune to be part of the discussion, but I don't need to hear the tune. So I'm just going to find ways to, you know, expand its little universe. There's always there's always some kind of affect. You think about the New Console, the dotted rhythms, or the Advent ones. They have that royal rhythm in it, that stuff that I've heard in Bach cantatas for forever. And for all the Baroque music that I listen to, that makes sense to me. Excuse me. Some of the pieces like Nocturne, that has the O Weltliche Mystische Lassen tune in there. But it's almost like it begins with a different piece. Right. And so sometimes to me that's an A and B. To do it that way, rather than to say, well, I'm going to actually pull the opening section from the contour of the tune. I think I'm just going to start with a universe in which the tune can exist for a moment or two. That last abstract, the Corpus Christi, there's that kind of sustained section in there. If you look really closely, it's a Dorothée Devote, kind of exploded. All the notes are kind of in there, but you couldn't hum it.
Right. Yeah. It's not a melody and accompaniment happening. Yeah.
I love these tunes, and I've got my father's old confirmation hymnal behind my shoulders here, and that's a TLH from 1940 or so, and it was fairly remarkable hymnal for its time. But a lot of the German chorales are in there, and the really obscure ones. So I can look there for form, and I can look there for context, and I just find myself using that book out of the source of comfort, of course, because that's my dad's hymnal. But on the other hand, it's certainly not some of the pieces that don't really go very far. There's a lot of new tunes that don't seem to have a lot of structure to them, and so I'm looking for something that's really well built.
Yeah. So it's sort of having, even in a piece where the chorale is not obvious, shall we say, in a way or another, it still means something to you, that it's sort of rooted in that, in your own personal history, and in sort of what inspires you to make the piece from it.
It's about the chorale. Right. It's about the chorale. It's about how I've experienced, and it's a new set of colors and shapes that I want to include that music in, instead of just saying, well, here's the chorale prelude, so we're getting ready to sing it. Like, no, I'm not thinking about filling that particular space with this music.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, you've also written a lot of organ pieces that relate to either works of art or works of literature, both poetry and prose, sometimes reacting to a larger thing, sometimes reacting to just a few lines from something, or a short poem. And in that, I would say, among the organ music that's often written in the sort of, if you look at the body of organ music, most of it is either free sort of music, or it's connected to church in some way, necessarily, whether that's hymn-based or expressive. And obviously there is other things, but you've written a large percentage of things, I would say a higher percentage than most people who write a lot of organ music do, related to art. And sort of, can you talk a little bit about how those things inspire you to write a piece, or why those are fertile areas you keep coming back to?
Well, I love how different arts, whether they're plastic arts or musical arts, kind of can inform each other, because underneath all of them is some form. When I'm thinking about a piece of music, people have also always asked, wow, where do you get your ideas? Of course, they're talking about the piece just played. They're not talking about the process of developing that through making it in your hand. Maybe some basic idea. The question that I asked myself, well, do these two ideas go together? And perhaps they may. And the next thing is, there's always some kind of formal context, because in order for those ideas haven't making sense. They have to have a dialogue. You have to have some way of interacting from each other. And then at some point, I got to decide how I'm going to represent them. Is it a symbol? Is it a structure? Whatever that is. So there's the little ideas, and I have those all the time. I don't know that there's ever a time when I don't have something rattling around my head.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's all useful is another story. Sometimes it's not. But sometimes there are things that are intriguing. And so I want to find some structure, context for them to make sense together. And then I have to find a way to represent that. And at the end of that, then it becomes that expression, which I know how I got there, but oftentimes somebody who's listening to this music has no idea. They can't find that. Sometimes those ideas, I may be reading, I've got my little poetry collection here, novels, or I may find an art book or whatever that is. And that's somewhere in those first two steps. They're not always at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I pick up a book and I immediately am inspired to write. That rarely happens. Mm-hmm. Usually it is a formal structure that has some resonance, and I recognize it for that. And I want to kind of tease it out, see where it's going to go. Art is, my mother is a wonderful contemporary art scholar, and she's not a professional. She just loves this stuff. And so when I was growing up learning about art, I wasn't looking at Rembrandts and all that. I was trying to discern between a Jackson Pollock and all of the various cubists, and she was able to explain this stuff to me. And what the thing that made sense was, it's about shapes. It's about how shapes have their own integrity, and that the cubists were really good about saying, okay, so a shape's got to be a shape. It can't just be fuzzy. And it's okay to have negative space between the two, because that makes me think about why they're together. And that makes sense to me musically, in terms of structuring works. So when we get to, if you think about it, I love reading old history. Cabeza de Vaca is such a strange story. And he came as a conquistador, went back as a healer, and people didn't quite know what to do with him, because they wanted the gold, they wanted the stuff he brought. But what he brought was the riches of learning about these cultures. And there's a local artist, local writer that is it Haniel Davis? I think of his last name. He he actually went through all of the Cabeza de Vaca's letters, and then made his own kind of journal about what it was like. I found it very moving and fascinating. And so I wanted to write some pieces about that. I was more into the book to start, and then the music kind of made sense. Mm-hmm. So I can't always say, well, everything starts the same. It just doesn't. Right. That's not it. The thing about shapes is really important. I had to teach myself this, because I know we've talked about not using sonata form, or not using rondo or whatever. And when I was living in Chicago, I was living in Oak Park, which is just, my house was a mile or so from the Frank Lloyd Wright studio. And that little house that he built in 1906 is as modern as anything I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. It's standing next to this big old bloated pink Queen Anne house. It's really fascinating, to see this stuff. But as he was growing up, he had the Froebel gift, the Froebel Gaben. You ever heard of those? Mm-hmm. They're teaching things for kids, and I even have some. Yeah. See that? And then of course then you have a orange square.
Oh right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've actually used these in composition lessons.
Oh.
And what I say to my composition kids, well, first off, we're going to order these shapes so they make sense. So you may actually need 2 squares, right? Or you may need, so whatever that is. But we're going to make a little linear graph of shapes. Mm-hmm. And they start to see a rhythm in that. It's like, well, these are kind of the same, and those are kind of the same, but they don't have to be together. So we'll just stack them out. So all right, now we're already forming some kind of architecture in there. But when you're writing this music, I don't want you to write it so it sounds like it's purple, or that it sounds like a triangle. I want you to write it with this much definition. so that every section is clearly what it is. And so when I'm working, like, for instance, White Chrysanthemum, that piece, I actually sat down. There's this whole collection of Rex Roth translations of Japanese poetry that I have in my library. I love them. And this one is a very obscure piece. It's kind of a strange thing. But as I was writing it, I actually set out 9 measures, 7 measures, 5, 3. There's a 1 in there, and then there might be an 11 or something. So prime numbers. But I asked myself, well, why are you playing this game? And I didn't have an answer. So I wrote out 9 measures, which is the first 9 bars of White Chrysanthemum. And the test for me is that, can that section go to the end and repeat back and still have make some sense? And can it go on to the next section and still feel like there's a conversation going? Because what happened, especially with the cubist especially, is that, your shapes have to not be so much of the same, kind of different, but mostly the same thing, because then the piece is measured. It no longer has this journey that you can kind of take through it. And so when I'm writing those little sections, I'm thinking, do they stand alone? Can they come from? Can they go to whatever that next portion is? And then they've got to be this clear. It's like, yeah, okay, so it is a red square music. Doesn't have to sound square. It doesn't have to sound red, but it's got to be, okay, whatever that definition is. If I use it again, it will be there. So this is why I'm less concerned when I'm putting together an architectural structure that way, that A, or whatever I've numbered it, is repeated later exactly as it is without embellishment, because I'm actually hearing these shapes then in dialogue. And each time something is repeated after a new section is intervened, I hear that first piece differently. It's slowly changing its context. So
often early in the pieces, when a section is presented, often it repeats itself immediately. And right. Do you see that as a sort of an imprinting, defining of that element?
Yeah. And I've worked with White Chrysanthemum without the repeats, with all the repeats, with some of them and not others. And one of the tricks is to try and get that romantic notion of narrative out of your head.
Yeah. Very hard to get out from under that. Yeah.
I know it is, but it's a way of seeing this as, how are you going to gather these shapes in your head so that you remember them? I remember we talked about maybe it was Ascension Abstract or one of the others, where that's just about at the limit of stuff you can manage. I'm still working with that. I'm not sure I will really have the full answer on that point.
It's fascinating window into sort of making the pieces. I'm curious what you think of from the listener's perspective. Let's say if we take those earlier this year, you wrote 3 organ pieces inspired by images from Sinclair Lewis's novel Babbitt, American novels of the 1920s, obviously, which I recorded, and it sort of, as I was working on them, I very much was sort of putting my mind back into, I hadn't read the book in years, but sort of putting my mind back into that world and sort of thinking about, sort of affecting some of the registration choices or the pace of the coloring, just sort of that atmosphere. So I think if when we're presenting it to a listener, you could present it that way. I wonder, is that context absolutely essential? Is it like if those pieces appeared on a concert just called 3 Pieces for Organ and someone listened to it that way with no other context, what do you think is that just a different way? Is that a worse way to experience it? Is that,
That's a great question. That's a great question. Those Babbitt pieces really do come from the book. And they really probably ought to be in the order a reverse order, which is to play Babbitt the man first, because it's got all of his little trumpetings and his music and things like that. And then that rather sticky garden party that's in the center. And then, of course, the Shining Spires of Zenith is, as I was working through those, I wanted something that had that, as much as I could figure it out, that American, that kind of brass, bright sound. And I think that the pieces kind of move through a narrative of their own that without the context of the story, you might still hear them as well made, but there's some extra little catch. Hemet was so much about the theology of things and about the modern conveniences and about I'm gonna be the next best up, but he never really gets there. And there's always this internal struggles like can't you just be? Do you really have to perpetually drag yourself through all of this one up, next thing, the competing with the Jones, and constantly concerned about what the next sales pitch is going to be? Is that you're actually not all of the stuff that you built around you, you're in service to. It doesn't celebrate you. It kind of holds you in check. And so those pieces that, the first one certainly there's a lot of psychology in that, just in the sense that he's got his Babbitt fanfare themes, and he's this guy, right? And he's successful. He can sleep on his own porch in the front of the house. I've always thought that was an interesting idea. I have my own sleeping porch. How cool would that be? But then
maybe not with the temperature that you're experiencing in New Mexico in the middle of the summer. Yeah,
that would be intense. Yeah, and in the desert there aren't bugs that fly; they all crawl on the ground. So you need to be up. But he wrestles with this, and so that's what those pieces kind of do. They pick up on that. I think the one that helps to tell the story about that bright city is that third one, the Shining Spires. It's not the same piece as Bold City from the American Scene.
Right.
They're really at different things. And, this one has a little more grit to it and a little more I'm not sure. And that's who Babbitt is. He's just really not sure. Yeah. So I love that book, and I've read it a couple times, and really impressed me. I read it when I was much younger, and really impressed on me about the theology of things. How can anybody be that really wrapped up in needing stuff? And so it's been interesting. But your question is true. I think that piece in particular, and perhaps some of the others that are named for a character or something, it's really helpful. My that piano trio, the 4 panels in a gallery.
Yes.
Piece. So when we premiered that in Virginia, I got to go out and I was supposed to give the notes for the performance. So someone said, well, I'm trying to Google these paintings that you're talking about. And I said, well, there aren't any. Said, well, what are you talking about? Is it Barnett Newman? I said, no, it's not Barnett Newman. It's like, well, I'm looking for this one that's purple like you expressed. Like it doesn't exist. I gave you that image because I want you to have that in your head while you listen to the piece. Oh, so they listened, and afterwards, same people. This is a great group. This is all at Garth Newell Art Center there. Wonderful performers, and they just live around chamber art. It's really amazing. But they said that was really a way for me to enter this piece of music. Now it's repetitive. It does have that structure that I've been working through. It's a beautiful work, but I needed a little more to kind of find my way into that, because I won't hear it another time. And so sometimes that's how you can make that connection. Part of when we're writing, you have to decide what those symbols are. If you're going to say, well, okay, I'm going to write a piece, I'm going to put a pipe in it and say, this is not a pipe, like Magritte, right? And as I'm going to suggest that this is about flying pumpkins, but it's actually something quiet with the celeste and a 2-foot flute. Is that really going to make is that the symbol you need to help them find whatever structure that's there? I'm not overly trying to make that work, but on the other hand, you got to be careful about what your symbols are so that they can manage, what's there. So that's part of the music making, right?
Right. Being conscious of how the ways those things can be heard. And
yeah. Now, of course, there are pieces that are masterpieces, not because they're good pieces, but because everybody knows them. And that's always the structure. So something new takes time to you got to hear it a few times.
Yeah.
But if you can go a little distant there by saying, this piece really is about a white canvas with gold flowers on it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'll think about it. So are they hearing that music is radiant and white? Well, maybe so. That's the whole idea.
No, I think it's very relevant, and I think it's particularly true when we're talking about pieces whose formal design is not necessarily connecting to some historical model as well. It's sort of like, if you're going to say, I'm going to play a happy rondo in G major for you now, you can explain the basic idea. This fun theme will come back 4 times, and in the middle will be some. It's sort of like, and for some people with a musical background, that expectation is that already set up. But it's sort of like you take one of your pieces. It's like I don't know which sections are going to come next. It's like that. You have to. So you're sort of all those elements, the how you present the material, how you repeat it, when things come back, and then what other images can draw people into it, I think are a significant part of drawing people in. Because I think we all of us who make music, for the most part, want it to be accessible in some degree, and using that using accessible in the most general sense, not in terms of specific harmonies or style or periods, but like for the most, like we want other people to be able to have access to our work in some way, and there are obviously as many different ways of doing that as there are probably people that write music, but but it's interesting. It's when you decide what parameters in your work connect to tradition and what don't, then you sort of have to think about, for the things that you're stepping outside of a established modality or whatever, then you have to think about, okay, I'm going to do this, but I also need to make sure that this communicates, assuming that that's it.
Yeah, church music has its own kind of place and it's different in America than it is in another country or another culture or tradition. And I've long been struggling with, I want to make music that fits for them, what liturgically needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But I also I don't want to get to a piece of music which has really it doesn't say anything about anything. It just fills space. Or actually, it's not really filling space. It's just taking it up.
Right, taking up time.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
There's so many pieces that I see that don't tell me anything about the composer. They don't tell me anything about the tune, what they think about the tune. It just starts in E flat and it ends in E flat, and it's 2.5 minutes, and then that's it. And yet, our churches have a fairly hefty diet of that. So in my parish work, I've tried to make sure that I don't let that go, because I know that not everybody's got the full exposure to materials. And to pull art music or chamber music from whatever to at least break open that kind of stuck in the mud sense,
mm-hmm.
and then bring in new things that really don't define well, that they have to hear. And I played White Chrysanthemum probably 3 or 4 times at Canterbury, and I was getting more used to the piece as I was working through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they were starting to hear it more because they'd had a chance to actually listen to it both on the piano and the organ. It works in both places. But if I made a whole diet of stuff that doesn't fit or that doesn't define well, it's not about fitting, it's about defining well for somebody who doesn't know what they're listening to. That's hard. But I know that if it's just all this amorphous stuff, that doesn't work either, because then it's just, like I said, taking up space.
Right.
So
right.
you just got to do more than that. It's art that really communicates way beyond what we can say with words. So
Absolutely.
It's important to make sure it's got the whole panoply of colors. It's been an interesting struggle, because I have had conversations with my colleagues who have a very narrow, what they learned in school is good rep, but that's it. It doesn't go earlier, and it doesn't go later. And they work hard on this music, and they usually play it really well, and that's all good. But to break out of that is tough. And sometimes that's not a new piece. It's like, you should play some Scheidemann. Well, who's Scheidemann?
Right.
Like, well, he was this dude who, was really popular. He wrote a lot of stuff. The tunes, you're Lutheran. Really? So it's that kind of thing to kind of make sure that the church's language musically is not just a same diet, because it starts to lose its capacity to be expressive. So yeah, I hope that I can't manage the big symphonic rep. I never could play that stuff. It hurts my hands, and I've always complained about it. I love Frescobaldi. That's as obscure as it can be. And it's gorgeous. And I love lots of new stuff. I was always fascinated with Daniel Pinkel's music before I ever knew who he was. David knew who he was.
Sure.
And I played through as much stuff as I could figure out how to get in my hands. And all of those things gave me, permission to write out of the box. And so they're really, really wonderful. I just think that, as a church musician, we truly got to find a way so that we're not just in this rut, because it's too much same stuff. And then you don't expect anything of it, and it doesn't have anything to offer you. And that's kind of not what we should be doing. I think we got more we can offer for that, for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, well, that's a good spot to wrap up our discussion. Thank you so much, Fred. It's great to talk, and I hope those who watch this find a little insight into your work. I encourage anyone to examine Fred's website, frederickfrahm.com, and explore more of his work. And in the description of this video is a link as well to a playlist of many of Fred's organ pieces, including some of the ones that we talked about here, and I encourage you to explore those. A good many of the pieces of recent years are published by Firehead Editions, Firehead Organ Works, that Fred, along with Hugh Morgan in England, established a few years ago as a digital publisher. So the music is very readily available, and to any organist watching, everyone should have a piece of Fred's in their repertoire for sure. And there are a lot to choose from, whether you like paintings or poetry or old German chorales, or there's a lot there. And whether your organ is huge or has a single stop and one keyboard, you can find something that will work and everything between. So thank you so much, Fred. It's wonderful to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Carson.